Hello and welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Coros Pace Pro and the Garmin Forerunner 965. These are two excellent AMOLED sports watches with maps. They're two of our favourite watches on the channel, and we wanted to do this comparison because even though the Forerunner 965 is a fair bit more expensive than the Pace Pro, I think it is a comparison that people out there will be considering because they are both among the best sports watches on the market. Now obviously on price, the Coros Pace Pro is a bit more directly comparable to the Garmin Forerunner 265. That's a comparison that we covered more extensively in our best mid-range watches videos, but we wanted to also compare these two watches because I've been wearing both of them for a month for one reason. In the first section of this video, I'm going to go through the design and the key stats of the watches, kind of break out the more objective differences between them, and then we're going to have a long run test and verdict section where myself, Kieran and Mike are all going to go through which watch we choose from the two and why. So obviously the first key stat, I guess, to mention is the price, which is a very important difference between these two watches. The Pace Pro is a lot cheaper at £349 or dollars, whereas the Forerunner 965 is £599 or dollars. Now, this is offset a bit by the fact that Garmin's a little bit older and it does come down in price, to £499 or dollars, I think, fairly regularly, but it's still a big price difference. So more or less the focus of this video is going to be the case of, is there enough extra on the Forerunner 965 to make it worth the extra money compared to the Coros Pace Pro? So design, the Forerunner has a couple of little advantages. You've got a titanium bezel on the watch, and it's also got a slightly larger screen at 1.4 inches compared to 1.3 inches for the Coros Pace Pro. You've also got Garmin's 5-button design versus Coros's 2-button design, with one of those being a digital dial. The Garmin is a slightly bigger watch, a slightly heavier watch as well, and it is a little bit thicker, I think, than the Coros Pace Pro, despite the listed stats you get from each brand. But they are both very lightweight watches that sit very comfortably on the wrist compared to stuff like the Phoenix and the Coros Vertix range. So both have got multi-band GPS and the usual array of key sensors you need for sports tracking, things like a barometric altimeter and a pulse oximeter. And then when it comes to connecting to external sensors, there's a little advantage to the Garmin in that it can connect via ANT Plus and Bluetooth, whereas with Coros you just get Bluetooth. Both of them have got loads of sports modes and loads of training analysis features, but Garmin has a little bit more on both fronts. You've got a golf mode for one on the Forerunner 965 and slightly more extensive training analysis, including features like training readiness. They both have maps that you can download to the watch to follow routes. With Garmin, you're getting slightly more developed navigation features with routable maps and a few extra tools like Climb Pro. When it comes to the battery life, it's actually pretty similar between these two watches. Like on paper, Garmin looks like it might have a slightly longer amount of battery life when it comes to watch mode, but the Coros offers more battery life in multiband and every GPS mode, so it does kind of even out over time. We'll talk more about that in our individual run tests. And then on smart features, this is an area where you certainly get a lot more from the Garmin Forerunner 965. You are getting the ability to link up to music streaming services like Spotify, as well as being able to store music on the watch itself. With Coros, you just get to store MP3 files on the watch. You've also got NFC payments with the Garmin through Garmin Pay and the limited Connect IQ app store, which is pretty small, but there are some useful apps in there. You don't really get any of that on the Coros, and you also get a lot more customization on the Garmin in terms of the stuff you can show on your watch faces, in that you can show things like the weather forecast and stuff like that, whereas it's all a bit more locked in with the Coros.
So in terms of my run testing experience with these two watches, it's been very good overall. I think from a design point of view, not a huge amount to pick between the two. They're not the most rugged watches available. They haven't got the best level of protection on those screens, but I think what you do get are watches that are a good size, I think are comfortable to wear, don't feel too heavy. I felt happy taking these to bed to track my sleep as well. So from that point of view, all very good, and you're getting very good AMOLED displays here. Two of the best that you can find on a multi-sports running watch at the moment, and it makes features like mapping and navigation, just looking at the screens day to day, just a nice thing to do. I think software point of view, all very slick. This is probably the slickest Coros watch available at the moment, and I think Garmin's AMOLED's kind of centric watches are just generally very slick and responsive to use. So from that point of view, all very good. Getting into that kind of core run tracking performance, I think, there's not a huge amount in it from things like the kind of dual bands, kind of multi-band GPS modes. I think, they're not infallible, but I think in general for day-to-day, kind of running that I've done and the racing that I've done with these watches, I've felt very happy with the performance from that point of view. Similar story with the heart rate monitoring, I would still pair them with heart rate monitor chest straps. For steady pace runs, absolutely fine. And it's very easy to pair kind of external heart rate monitors to both of these watches. I think we do start to get a little bit of separation is, I think, one area, I think battery life is very good on both, whether you're using with a raise to wake or kind of that always on mode. I think you're maybe getting a little bit more on the battery front from the Coros Pace Pro, just because, I think it's a bit more efficient in terms of what's happening in between, when you're not tracking your runs. And I think it kind of just conserves that battery a little bit better. There's not, as I said, not a big difference, a huge enough difference, but I think it is a difference I have noticed in my time. I think the other area as well is that these both have good levels of kind of training analysis and insights, and if that's something that you want, then you absolutely get that on and off the watch. I think for me, the way that training analysis and insight is delivered on the watches particularly just feels a little bit nicer. I think off the watch, I think, there's still a lot of work to do from both brands to kind of make that, presentation of that data just easier to engage with and absorb. But I think, things like training readiness on the Garmin watch, things like the morning reports, which kind of can collate some of that information for you, and how it's presented in, the widgets that you can kind of stream through. I think, it just works a little bit nicer, and it's just, I think, better optimized for the watch in general. But, the training insights themselves are, are telling me similar things. That's not a massive slight on the Coros Pace Pro. I think if you are leaning on things like predictions for your races, I'm seeing similar information there, telling you when to kind of ease off, whether your training load is, too high or whether you're kind of optimal. Then they're going to tell you similar things. Just for me, there's a bit of a better kind of presentation of that information on the watch, particularly on the Garmin. But from that core run tracking experience, I think, very similar for me. I've had a good experience in both of these watches. I think if you are looking for good running watches, both are going to serve you well. Which one I would pick, I'll get into that in my verdict. So the biggest compliment I can pay to these two watches is that after I've tested them, I've been very happy to continue wearing them to track my runs. And I think if you're looking from a design point of view, looking at those AMOLED displays, looking at that core run tracking experience and accuracy, things like training insights, battery life, there's not a huge amount to pick between these two watches. If I had to pick, I personally would still be going for the Garmin Forerunner 965, and I put that down into a couple of key areas. I think the first one being for me is the presentation of the training insights, and I just think it's executed a little bit better on the Garmin watch, particularly on the watch itself. I think the other area is, how it's, what it's like to live with day to day outside of running. I think from a smartwatch experience, I think the Forerunner 965 just feels a little bit nicer. And if that's something you're looking from your running watch, then I think the Forerunner 965 just offers a little bit more on that front. If you don't care about those things, then I think the Coros Pace Pro, given that it's much cheaper, as I said, that kind of experience is still very good outside of those things that I mentioned, then I would be going for the Coros Pace Pro. But for me, I think the Forerunner 965 just edges it for me for those things. But as I said, I think the Coros Pace Pro is fantastic. It's one of the best AMOLED multi-sports watches and running watches you can buy. It's just for me, I think those key areas on the smartwatch side of things, the presentation, that training analysis and insights just works a little bit better for me on the Forerunner 965. So that's a watch I would be picking.
So what you've got here are two very capable running watches that cover a lot of the same bases. On paper, they share a lot of closely matched key specs. They've got similar battery life. You've got nice, bright AMOLED displays on both. You've got a lighter, more 24/7 friendly design than some of the bigger watches like the Phoenix, the Vertix, the Epix, the Enduro, those kind of stable mates. But in testing, I didn't find a huge discrepancy between the performance of these watches either, but more on that in a mo. For me, the key difference here is that the Garmin Forerunner 965 offers a wider range and a greater depth of features that are a little bit more polished. I also find them a bit more accessible in terms of how the language is conveyed, the way the insights are displayed. It's just a bit easier to use. You also get a slightly bigger screen without adding the extra weight, though I found both AMOLED screens bright and easy to read in most light conditions. It doesn't make a huge difference that you've got a bit more real estate. And some might find the lighter, slightly more compact nature of the Pace Pro a bit easier to wear. On balance, the 965 is the better looking watch with that titanium bezel. I like the coloured strap as well. The Coros Pace Pro looks a bit cheaper. It's somewhat more plastic overall. Another small thing on design, I much prefer Garmin's charger. The Pace Pro has this, I've got it here, just reaching back for it. The Pace Pro has this kind of little weird adapter that I'm always frightened that I'm going to lose. Then on to performance. When it comes to the accuracy, I found the optical heart rate did what optical heart rate does on both watches. Both were quite a close match for the Polar H10 chest strap on the easy or steady intensity runs. Not too many problems there, but they did struggle at times to keep pace when I was having sharp changes in effort during intervals, shifting the gears, that kind of thing. The GPS performance was solid on both. They were quite a close match. In all my runs, they came well within that sort of 10% margin for error. I wouldn't buy one or the other based on GPS or heart rate performance. On features, I still think Garmin is a bit ahead of Coros, not only in the breadth of its analysis, sort of in the app and on the watch itself, but also in the presentation. That gap has certainly closed, and there's more than enough training and performance recovery insights on the Pace Pro to suit most runners' needs. you'll get what you need out of this watch. But Garmin just about has the edge in this area in terms of the overall finesse of it all. If you care about the intricate measurements like readiness, body battery, etc., endurance score, hill score, then I think it's a bit of a better tick for the Garmin over the Coros Pace Pro. Its navigation smarts are better too, with routable mapping that works on the fly. You don't get that on the Coros Pace Pro. I also think Garmin's Climb Pro Tool is a standout feature that Coros misses. It's excellent for racing hilly ultras where you get loads of detail on what awaits you up ahead, the climbs that you're going to have to do, or where you are at in a kind of given climb or a descent. That's something that I use it for if I'm heading out to do those sort of mountainous ultras. On battery life, both offer good GPS runtime for an AMOLED watch. The Coros, in my test, this is the Coros, isn't it? The Coros did last longer for a 1 hour run in max GPS modes with the always on screen settings off. The Garmin burned about 3 to 4% on average, while the Coros burned around 2%. Though you'll likely end up charging them about the same amount of time in a month or over a set period with regular running and general use. Garmin wins the smartwatch smarts battle too, with tools like contactless payments, offline music with Spotify, and Garmin Messenger. Coros Smarts are a bit limited in that front notifications. You get some offline music, but it relies on you owning music files and transferring them over in a rather clunky way. Not sure how many of us still own music files. If you're a fan of tinkering as well, the Garmin Forerunner watch face is more customizable than the Coros Pace Pro watch face, and there's more choice of faces too. And you've also got that kind of backup of the Garmin Connect IQ store for other apps and tools. Verdict then, and I think bang for buck, the Coros Pace Pro offers the better value. It's a highly capable watch with a cracking display, good staying power, lightweight wearability, and a comparable GPS and heart rate accuracy to the 965. There are features missing though that you'll get on the 965, but there's still enough firepower to cover most runners' needs. And if you don't mind a slightly cheaper looking watch and a few less navigation and smartwatch tools, it's a really top AMOLED option for the price. The Garmin Forerunner is the more rounded watch though. It has better all-round tracking and training tools, better music, better mapping, it's better looking. The big question is whether those additional features are deal breakers for you, or at least worth the extra £200 that you're going to pay. I think my head says the Garmin Forerunner 965, but my wallet says the Coros Pace Pro.
So these are both excellent watches, and I've pretty much been wearing one or both of them for most of the last year as two of my favourite sports watches. Really the question here comes down to whether the Garmin does enough extra to make it worth the extra outlay. And I think on the key features that I would use for sports tracking, I don't really think it does, because the Pace Pro is so good at all of the essentials. And even though the Garmin does have extra stuff, I'm not sure I'd use it personally that much. So the accuracy has been really good on both these watches for both GPS and heart rate actually. So I do find the Coros tends to read slightly shorter than the Garmin on most GPS tracks, but it's really a tiny amount, and I couldn't really say which is the correct one. And on heart rate, you kind of get the usual optical heart rate performance. I think these are both pretty good for optical heart rate monitors. They will occasionally go wrong during hard sessions and when it's cold outside, but actually they read pretty accurately for the most part. So yeah, overall, I don't think accuracy would be a reason to pick one or other of these watches. They're both pretty impressive on that front. Battery life's been pretty similar as well. I think the Coros does last slightly longer though. So in my testing, I'm usually getting kind of 6 days out of the Forerunner 965, running every day with the always on screen activated. And it's usually 6 days in the Coros as well, but it's usually got a little bit more battery life than the Garmin left, and it can push to a 7th day sometimes. It's also got the extra battery life when it comes to GPS mode. So if you're doing more training, I think it will extend its lead over the Garmin a little bit in terms of battery life. But they're both pretty impressive. For pretty lightweight watches with bright AMOLED screens, they both do offer a really good battery life, I think. So if we call that almost the key stuff for me, the accuracy, the battery life, the fact that they're both got a really nice design that I find very comfortable to wear. It's all quite even, which is obviously a mark in the Coros' favour, given that it's a lot cheaper. But then there are, quite a few areas where I do think the Garmin has the edge. So the design is better on the Garmin, I would say. I think it's a nice looking watch. The titanium bezel makes it look a little bit classier. You've got a bigger screen. And I do prefer the 5 buttons as well to the dial on the Coros, which, especially in the winter, I find catches on gloves quite a lot. I don't like having to lock my screen during activities. I just find that a bit annoying to then have to, unlock it to do anything. But yeah, I think the 5 buttons is a bit better, and the Garmin's a slightly nicer looking watch all round. Then the training analysis is better on the Garmin as well. You've got a more depth there. The training readiness stat, is pretty useful if you want to dive into that and get kind of a holistic look at you if you are wearing the watch all the time, and take into account that sleep tracking is not always going to be perfect, but also kind of basic acute load versus chronic load stuff I think is a bit better presented on the Garmin. It makes a bit more sense to me. The Coros is doing a perfectly acceptable job on that front, and its race predictions are more accurate accurate, I find, than the Garmin. But yeah, I think Garmin's training analysis is a bit better. Same goes for its navigation features. The routable maps are really important if you're going to try and create new routes on the fly or find your way home without just getting a pointer, which you do get on the Coros. And then Climb Pro is an excellent feature that will help lots of people kind of navigate their way through hilly routes, trying to judge their efforts on uphills in particular. The better smart features on the Garmin aren't really a big thing for me, but if you are someone who has a music streaming service, that's a big tick in the Garmin box, which isn't there for the Coros. Like, having to drag and drop files across isn't the best way to listen to music and stuff like that, I find. Even as someone listens to podcasts, it's quite a faff to get hold of MP3 files to then get onto the watch compared to using the Garmin, which is a little bit easier all round. And then you do get NFC payments, especially in America, they're a bit more useful. I think in the UK, you have to navigate your way around the lack of high street banks and use apps and that kind of thing. So those smart features aren't a huge deal for me, but I do like having my parkrun barcode on the watch. That's come in useful several times. Can't really do that on the Coros. And I do like the greater amount of customization you get on the watch face for the Garmin, like simple things like having the weather forecast on your watch face, and also like my weekly miles run, that kind of thing. I really like having that on the front of my watch, and I like the extra customization. I think there's just nicer watch faces on the Garmin, which does add a lot, because that's the face you see the most throughout the day, and I do think it just creates a slightly nicer user experience. In general, the user experience on the Garmin's a bit slicker, a bit more polished, and the way the widgets are presented is nice and colourful, and it's an easy to use watch all round. That said, the Coros app I think is probably a little bit more easy to use than Garmin's, which is still a bit of a mess after all these years, where there's features I need to use several times a week that are still buried behind 3 menus, like structured workouts and courses. But yeah, I do think on the actual watch itself, the experience is a little bit better on the Garmin. So yeah, ultimately the Garmin is a better watch, which you'd 100% expect given the price difference. But is it 150, 200 pounds better, depending on sales, that kind of thing? If I was looking at buying one of these watches, I would buy the Coros Pace Pro for myself, because like I say, it ticks all the boxes I need. It does stuff like accuracy, battery life really well. I like the design, it's nice and lightweight. I think it suits all my needs, and you get a big saving there. The Garmin is a better watch. If someone else is going to buy the watch for me, I'd ask for the Garmin, because if it's their money, great. I'd rather have the nicer watch, and it is a really impressive watch all round. I think it's probably the watch I rate the most highly of anything on the market, the Garmin Forerunner 965. It just packs in so many features in a really nice, lightweight and attractive design at a cheaper price than things like the Phoenix, even if it's not quite as rugged as the Phoenix. I do think it's absolutely outstanding and better than the Pace Pro, but I don't think for me it would be 150, 250 pounds better than the Pace Pro, which I've really enjoyed using as my main running watch for an extended period now.